Welcome back to Divulgence, everybody. Today, I'm very excited to welcome back author and researcher and academic. He's working on a lot of interesting stuff. He's written good handful of books, including Fool's Errand, Enough Already, Hotter Than the Sun, his newest book, and his newer podcast. They're both called Provoked. Scott Horton, how are you, Scott?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming back. Before we get started, I would love to hear about, I understand you got a lot of big things going on in addition to the book and the podcast. So can you just tell us a little bit about what you got going on, my friend?
Yeah, well, you're probably familiar with the great Tom Woods and his Liberty Classroom.
Yes.
He built me my own Liberty Classroom, and it's about to go live. It should be next week. Should be earlier than next week, I think. If you go to scotthortonacademy.com, you'll see we have a little promo video there, and you can put your email address in, so you'll be the first to know when we launch the thing.
Did it already, man.
Cool. So it's me doing essentially long form, lectures, like many tens of hours long on the terror wars and on expansion in Eastern Europe and the origins of the new Cold War. Basically walking you through my last two books in super slow motion there. And then plus also have a bunch of other great guys with me. The great James Bovard has done his courses on 40 years of hard-hitting investigative journalism. Ramsey Baroud has done his on the reality of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And then William Bupert, his story is, or his course is Trail of Tears, American Military Defeat since 1945. And we have more courses coming, including C.J. Kilmer on how Woodrow Wilson is the worst person who ever lived. And this other guy whose name I always forget, who Tom found, who's a Lutheran scholar, theologian, academic type, who's going to debunk all the dispensationalist stuff about why it ain't right that Christians have to support modern day Israel. So,
Wow.
So that's getting us going. We're starting with the 4. We'll be adding, and then I'm a little bit behind on my Cold War course. We'll be adding that probably next month. But we're starting out with the 4 courses, mine on the terror wars, and then Bovard, Baroud, and Bupert to get going. That's all at scotthortonacademy.com, and I know everybody's going to really like it a hell of a lot.
So honestly, that's great, man. Good for you, because I personally, I really appreciate what you do. When I first heard of you back, even before I started the podcast, I gravitated to you right away. You were one of the first guys I wanted to have on the show, which you were. And now that the show's back up and running, I'm very happy to have you back. So my point is that in my mind, that's exactly what I want and I need, and I think other people need, is great researchers and academics like yourself taking your all the hard work you've done into determining the facts of all these different conflicts, wars, and situations, and putting it out there for people to digest. So these are classes that you have, that you prepare in advance, and then is that correct? And then
yeah.
And then what's the process? People sign up. What do you have to do to get membership and stuff like that? Is it a subscription kind of thing?
Yeah. So it's you'll either be able to subscribe year by year or get a lifetime subscription. And right now that's just kind of a splash holder page. We'll have a new front page there for everyone to sign up. We'll make it real easy for you, and there will be an app so you can do it on your phone and all that to make it easy. And then, yep. So it should be real good, man. I'm excited. Been watching the other guys' stuff, and it's all really great stuff. So.
Right on. Well, I appreciate you guys doing something like that for the good of the people. I'd like to get into first, Russia and Ukraine, but let's talk a little bit about your book first, because that's obviously a big topic of it. Sure. You have the floor, my friend. It's Provoked, correct?
Yes, published last November, Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. And obviously I picked that title because if you remember back 3 years ago, they said this was the unprovoked attack, unprovoked attack, unprovoked attack. Like it was hypnosis. You were supposed to just roll over or something and not ask. When to me, it just made it more obvious. So like, come on, you guys. I mean, what you're really saying is don't look into how we provoked this war. Like that's the whole purpose of even trying to coin that term for it. It's ridiculous. Um, just it reminds me when I was a kid, the George H.W. Bush administration attacked this family out in the mountains in Idaho, the Weaver family. And they
Oh,
killed the boy and the dog on the first day. And then they murdered the wife a couple days later.
yes.
And, the Ruby Ridge attack.
Ruby Ridge. Yes.
Yeah. And what they did was, the father and the family friend survived. The family friend was wounded. The father, Randy Weaver, survived. And since he was wholly an innocent victim, the ATF had set him up in the first place. The marshals had killed his son, and the FBI murdered his wife. They murdered his son and the FBI murdered his wife. So what they do? They renamed the guy. Instead of being Randy Weaver or even like former Green Beret Randy Weaver, he was white separatist Randy Weaver. And that way, you are forbidden from having any sympathy with this guy or looking at things from his point of view whatsoever. And now I know you're saying to me, but Scott, didn't Randy Weaver work in town at an auto garage where his boss was a black guy and they were the best of friends? And I'm saying, yes, of course that's true. These people are evil liars and murderers. But the point is that they named him that and it stuck and it works when you do that, So that was what they did with this war. Unprovoked attack, unprovoked attack, unprovoked attack, which means that if you want to even try to get to the bottom of it, now, oh, what are you saying? That it was justified? And that you're taking Russia's side of the story to explain why they did. And so it's just a propaganda ploy. And it ought to be, to me, it's as transparent as could possibly be. I don't know how anyone could fall for it. In fact, when I was writing the book, I was desperate to try to hurry, although you wouldn't know it by the length of the thing, because I was terrified that somebody else was going to publish a book called that before I was ready. You know what I mean?
Yeah, really.
It was such an obvious thing to title a book.
It was a good one.
Yeah, you could call it. Are you kidding me? This thing was provoked as could be. I don't know. But it's not called Justified. And I do argue in the book that I don't think that the Russians had to do what they did, and certainly not at the moment that they did. There was no outright emergency that necessitated their immediate, crossing of the border at that time. And I think eventually they'll regret it, even though I think they'll win. I think it's a Pyrrhic victory, and it'll cost the Russians far more than they gain in doing the thing. So I'm not saying it's justified or a good idea from the point of view of the Russian, side of the story at all. But it is absolutely true that the United States of America picked this fight, and particularly Joe Biden himself, and refused to do anything to negotiate a peaceful conclusion to the thing and avoid the war because they thought it was smart to go ahead and have a war, which sounds crazy, but they are crazy. And in the book, the reason the book is so long is because I trace it back to H.W. Bush. And I point out that, even though Bush Sr. on the surface took a positive attitude toward the falling Soviet Union, and to all of our benefit, it probably helped the Soviet Union collapse, that he wasn't pushing very hard, which would have strengthened the hardliners on the other side. You know what I mean? However, he really was betraying the Russian heroes who overthrew the USSR by promising them one thing, but meaning something else. And first they promised the Soviets and then later the Russians that we're not going to expand our military alliance east. They knew they were lying the whole time. They were promising that they would build a new security structure for Europe and Russia would be full partners in it, meaning that any nations between Russia and Germany would also be full partners at the same time, all neutrality baked in, nothing to fight about. They knew that that wasn't the case. They knew that what they were going to do instead was expand the NATO alliance and American dominance in Europe, not just where it was, but into Eastern Europe and the former Warsaw Pact states as well, and eventually even into the former Soviet republics like the Baltic states. And they began to threaten to bring in Georgia and Ukraine, former Soviet so-called republics from back in the battle days, and former parts of the Russian Empire before that. So that was the kernel of it all. Was at the end of the last Cold War, the Bush Sr. planted the seed of future confrontation there. And Bill Clinton just carried on the same policy. W. Bush and Obama continued to make it worse. And just to sum up very quickly, it's NATO expansion, the Balkan Wars, shock therapy, economic policy in the 1990s, tearing up the nuclear treaties, installing missile defense systems in Romania and Poland from dual use, missile launchers that can host Tomahawk cruise missiles that can be tipped with H-bombs, as sort of circumventing the previous non-proliferation agreements. The color-coded revolutions in all of Russia's near abroad against their friends and neighbors, like in Georgia, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, attempts in Belarus and other places, in order to install pro-American governments there, and virtually always leading to violent conflict in response. And then especially the Bucharest Declaration by Bush Jr. in 2008 and the promise to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, followed by Obama in his Libyan war for one, and then especially the overthrow of the government of Ukraine for the second time in 10 years, and the installation of a hard right nationalist junta that immediately, at American behest, declared a civil war against the people in the east of the country who didn't want to accept the new coup regime. And it was a vast overreaction to the actual situation, and it caused a horrible civil war there that then they refused to solve. And of course, Russiagate also absolutely hampered Donald Trump's ability to put this thing to bed during his first term. And then when Biden came in, look, Joe Biden has always been scum. Okay. The guy is just absolutely a horrible person. He's always been an absolutely horrible person in every way. One of the most vainglorious and self-interested kind of scum. You know, like I compare him to Hillary Clinton, but in a way he's a different creature from her, because at least she does read her briefing book. You know what I mean? She does. It's not that she cares about the world, but she cares about doing her evil job effectively in a way that, whatever. She does read the damn material. Joe Biden is just basically John McCain, right? Just absolutely know nothing, know it all, blow hard, a-hole with an opinion on everything, wrong about everything, doesn't know the first thing about anything, but always pounding his fist on the table and demanding we have to do X, Y, Z, wherever it is, and almost always in concert with John McCain demanding war. And if that means outflanking Ronald Reagan on the right, or outflanking, Bill Clinton or George W. Bush even, and demanding that they move harder and faster, then he always has spent his whole career like that, right? He always was scum, okay? But then in 21, the guy's completely senile, out of his mind. By the time he's sworn in 21, he's lost 20 IQ points, right? His only brain that he has is Antony Blinken, right? Otherwise, he doesn't have anything. He's being led around by like his little nephew that he trusts. Okay. In the same way, well, that's not even a fair comparison to Kushner, because where Donald Trump is lazy and needed Kushner, Biden was lazy, plus also completely senile and out of it and needed a nap and was just completely out of his depth, absolutely out of his depth. So now take the worst Biden that's ever been, the least competent, the least intelligent, the least thoughtful, the least capable that he's ever been, and put him in a crisis on Russia's border. And what are we doing? And it's his policy. He can't back down on. He was the one who led the overthrow of the government in 2014 when he was vice president under Obama. Now he's seeing this thing through. And just, if you're paying attention at all in the year of 21, then you remember how it went. They were escalating. They were being provocative in Ukraine. For example, clamping down on the media and making further restrictions on, Russian language on the radio and in media and things like that. And then in September, after Putin, wrote his history paper about how Ukraine always did belong to us anyhow, what did Biden do? Instead of saying, now, whoa there, partner, we understand you're upset. Let's figure out how to make a deal. In fact, Angela Merkel's ratting on him this week, or last week, it was in the media. Angela Merkel said, at that point, after Biden and Putin's failed meeting that accomplished nothing in July of 21, I said the European Union ought to stand in the middle as a mediator and see if we can negotiate something. And I was shouted down and prevented from doing that by the Poles and the Baltic states. And in other words, in concert with the United States of America. And so Angela Merkel was prevented from intervening then, when she was the one. In fact, that's why they're doing this, is to prevent this closeness between Germany and Russia. And then the State Department in September promised again that, oh, hell yeah, you heard us and we meant it. We are bringing Ukraine into NATO someday. right? Not enough that we're promising to defend them now, but enough to definitely get them in a fight with their next door neighbor, right? It's completely irresponsible the way they did it. Now, again, to Biden's idiocy, I'm not just insulting the guy. The point is that at this time, he's not capable of thinking hard about this. He's only capable of thinking in the most bare type historical analogies. And you hear him, and in fact, all of his people, maybe this is true for all of Washington, it's certainly true for him at this time. You hear all of them say the same thing. Well, it's Hitler. And when Hitler does stuff, you got to be Churchill. You can't be Chamberlain and appease Hitler. You have to be Churchill, who was never foolish enough to think that you could appease Hitler. And that's the lesson of World War II, that all enemies are Hitler, and we must always be Churchill / FDR eventually, whatever. And so if you ask Joe Biden in September, October 21, he would have told you that his last name is Roosevelt, right? Like, this is what he's doing, is being a hero, standing up against the forces of evil in the East. This is his place in the history of the world as he idiotically conceives it, right? When he's the one who's fomenting the crisis and refusing to negotiate in good faith to prevent it. And it was after that the Russians started building up in October. And then after they started building up in October, the Defense Department put out a new document swearing that, oh yeah, not only are we bringing them into NATO, but we're also working hard on standardizing Ukraine's military with ours and what they called interoperability, which meant that even without an Article 5 NATO membership, we are still making them essentially an auxiliary army under NATO. In other words, if America and the NATO alliance went to war against the Russian Federation, Ukraine's would be just another auxiliary army in the fight, along with Hungary and Germany and Lithuania and the rest, Poland and the rest, right? And so they were not given a full-fledged Article 5 war guarantee, but they were being made a de facto member of NATO anyway. And so here, right when Putin is saying, listen, guys, I'm getting really, really upset here and I'm threatening war, their attitude was, oh yeah, well, we promise. Again, we reaffirm the thing that we're doing that's provoking you in the first place. And that'll deter you. And if you go back to their policy, that was the policy, was to, one, announce, oh, we meant it about NATO membership, all right. We're never backing down from that. And then two, you better not invade. And if you do invade, we'll pour in a bunch of weapons and help them fight you. And the assumption was that their military would break and that we'd be backing an insurgency west of the river, west of the Dnieper River, maybe even in the far west of the country where they have mountains and forests and swamps and things for insurgents to fight from. And that was the assumption, was not that the Ukrainian military would last this long, but that they would be broken immediately. And then we would be funding basically a far Western right-wing nationalist mujahideen, a Nazi type mujahideen, like the stay behind in the early days of the Cold War against the Soviets, when the CIA backed the remnants of the Nazi forces in Ukraine after World War II there against the Soviet Union. And that we would go back to that. And so nowhere in that policy, if you're going back to November and December of 21 into January and February 22, nowhere in there was any serious attempt at diplomacy. They were willing to say, you better not. Well, first of all, they're willing to say, those things that are driving you crazy, we will never back down from those things. But you better not do anything about it. And then three, we'll just shine you on when it comes to your concerns. And in fact, this is especially bothersome to me, is that on the 30th of December of 21, Biden and Putin talked on the phone. And Biden said, and I believe him about this, I mean, this was always his position, in fact, if you read closely, and he reaffirmed this on his way out of the presidency. He told Putin, I have no intention of bringing Ukraine into NATO. Not anytime like in the next 10 years. Not anytime in the indefinite future, man. So like, it's just hyperbole anyway. Our open door policy that any nation has the sacred God-given right to join any military alliance it wishes. And that's just a bunch of talk, man. Don't get upset about that. We don't mean it, Biden said to Putin. And then he said, man, are you really worried that I'm going to station missile launchers in Ukraine that could be dual use launchers and host offensive missiles? I have to tell you, Vlad, I have no plans on doing that. And I have to tell you, I have never seen any indication that the Americans meant to be so crass and idiotic and stupid as to put those dual-use launchers that they have installed in Romania and Poland into Ukraine, right? This is, as far as I can tell, a completely hypothetical threat on the part of the Russians. Now, not one that they are wholly without reason to fear. Again, we did install these systems in Romania and Poland. We call them defensive missile launchers, but they can host offensive nuclear missiles, cruise missiles. So it is potentially a concern. So Biden said, Vlad, that's stupid, dude. I'm not going to do that to you. So Putin said, listen, Joe, sign the thing that says that. And Biden told him to go to hell. Right? He said, oh, yeah, no, we'll do that. And then didn't do that. Wendy Sherman said, yeah, we'll make a side deal about missiles. We won't sign a treaty with you. We won't treat you with the decent respect of a peer to sit at a table and sign a treaty. But if you want to do some kind of side agreement about missiles, yeah, we could do that. Tell you what, we'll do that the Tuesday after next. And then they never did it. And then they said, oh, you want to talk about NATO expansion and neutrality for Ukraine, a promise to not bring Ukraine into NATO? Tell you what, for the 1000th time, NATO is a defensive alliance and you have nothing to worry about. Okay. And that'll be good enough for you. Okay. Even though you're building up on their border, threatening to invade, and that clearly will not be good enough for you. Our position is that'll be good enough for you. And Derek Chollet, who worked for Biden, admitted that was true, that we refuse to talk about NATO at all, other than to tell them just because NATO began aggressive wars in Serbia, Afghanistan, and Libya doesn't mean it's not a defensive alliance. So shut up, which is, of course, completely stupid and crazy. And they were completely unwilling to accept it. And then the other major demand was that they come to a real resolution to end the civil war that was going on in Ukraine ever since 2014, in which the Obama administration let the Germans negotiate the deal, rubber stamped it, had the UN Security Council rubber stamp it, and then they never moved to implement it at all. And then the whole time Trump was president the first time, never moved to implement the deal at all. Now you can give him 3/4 points extra credit for the Russiagate hoax tying his hands, and even the Ukraine Gate hoax tying his hands after that. On the other hand, he still bears responsibility for that. And his ambassador, when the Germans tried to come up with a new proposal to finally implement the peace deal and a new compromise in 2019, Trump's ambassador, William Taylor, told the Ukrainians not to go along with it, not to implement it. So, and I don't know. I honestly don't know whether Trump even knew about that. And I think it's maybe doubtful that he was even in the loop on that. His own government did whatever they wanted on Russia policy in his first term. But it's still his responsibility ultimately. If he had run a tighter ship, he would have been in control of his ambassador, and that would have been under his wraps. But anyway, so go ahead. I'm sorry. So that basically that's the lead up to the war. Is a bunch of really bad diplomacy, a bunch of absolute unmitigated arrogance and bullying by the Americans against a bully who, I mean, if you ever went to school, you might know that like some nerds actually do have upper body strength. And just because they're nerds doesn't mean that they don't have an older brother and actually know a thing or two about how to fight. And you know what I mean? And so that's the deal with Russia. Is Russia far weaker than they used to be? Yeah. Are they far weaker than the United States? Yeah. Do they have a massive multiple 100,000 man armed force ready to kill people at a moment's notice? Yes, they do. And that's not going away just because you want it to not be so. You know what I mean? That is Russia France? Actually, no, they're not. And they have a lot more nukes than France too, comes down to it. France has a couple of hundred. They have a couple of thousand.
That you have the one book on that talks about nuclear war, right? I'm sure you talk about it in all your books, but yeah, that's scary, man. I mean, does it matter who's stronger when it comes to nuclear war?
No,
really?
No. I mean, look, Israel has 200 nukes. France and Britain have 200 nukes. China had 3. They're now building up. Looks like they're getting closer to 6, and maybe they're going to build up to parity with America and Russia, which is tragic. Somebody should have done something about that diplomacy-wise to solve that a long time ago. But America and Russia have about 1,700 deployed each, approximately. And then I forget now, is it another 5,000 each in storage, something like that? I think that's right. Yeah, they have about 7,000 each, with approximately maybe like 1,700 to 2,000 deployed and about 5,000 sitting on the shelf each. If there's a war between America and Russia, there are approximately 1,000 targets in each country to be hit on the first day. So that's it. That's all our major cities, all our major military bases, all our ports, all our, major junctions on our internal rivers, even, right? Like all internal trade, external trade. And I don't know the exact, I don't know if anybody really knows, but the modeling is, especially if you had a general nuclear war, that you would have a nuclear winter, because at least,
right,
not in every case, but in enough of these cities, you would have firestorms where the fires just rage and rage and there's no one to put them out, and then even from there spreading into multiple forest fires and God knows what out of control. And that it's enough to get the soot above the cloud layers up into the stratosphere with lower global temperatures. Now, it doesn't have to cause worldwide blizzards in July. It just has to cause the temperature to decrease by a few degrees. And, that can be enough to absolutely disrupt global food supplies and all that. And now the nuclear fallout, mostly if they're setting off H bombs at high altitudes, then probably the radiation will be a problem for only a few weeks and then not permanently. The real radiation problems comes from when they detonate atom bombs at dirt level, and it just absolutely irradiates all of the material, and then it gets stuck in there and spreads radiation that way. If they do it, high altitude over a city, then you'll have gamma rays for a while and all that, but mostly that'll kind of dissipate after a few weeks. But the thing is, for the survivors, you're talking essentially about every major city destroyed and every major transportation and trade hub destroyed. The future health of crops absolutely immediately in question. Labor forces, of course, just absolutely decimated. And so you're talking about, I mean, not that all technology will have been uninvented or anything like that, but
wow,
not just in terms of population, but in terms of like overall ability of people to interact with each other in a functional and complex economy. I mean, the people will have been set back at least hundreds of years. Never mind just the tragedy of the absolute hundreds of millions or billions of people killed on the first day, and all the maimed and all the injured and all the everything. It'd be, yeah, it, you know, you gotta admit, man, I've been like this since whatever, kindergarten or whatever, since the Reagan years. But like, wow, we really let our governments build these machines that can kill an entire city at a time. Like, what the fuck? Really? That's what guarantees our security. And that's the best idea that we can come up with, is the ultimate bluff, which works great as long as no one ever calls it. But if they ever call it, then we have to start our civilization all over again. Jeez, I don't know, guys. I'm not sure y'all really thought this through. I don't know. We have this egghead at the University of Chicago who did this equation, who says that it's all good, but yeah, I
right.
don't know.
Yeah, that's very, very fucking scary. I mean, and now, I mean, I don't know how systems are going to change with technology and AI coming in, but uh, not only is it just terrifying that a lot of this is played on bluffs and whose dick is bigger and all that kind of stuff, but like if you've seen like the classic movie Failsafe, or of course
Uh-huh.
Stanley Kubrick's Doctor Strangelove, like there could be some sort of like technical error or human error or something that just sets off like a domino effect. And then if something is launched and does land and detonate, I mean, um yeah, I mean, I don't think much matters at that point. I mean, there'll be retaliations, I feel like there'll be other countries jumping in, maybe some shady characters will start launching and try to cover it up. And then before you know it, like the earth is like a block of Swiss cheese, and it's just it's we're done with, man. We're done with.
Yep. And we've
Yeah,
had so many close calls. People just don't want to think about it. There's
yeah,
been like 20 times where we almost went to nuclear war because of a misunderstanding or
really.
because, things.
I mean,
And
there's obviously the uh, Cuban Missile Crisis is something that people think of, but but please go on. Like, can you talk a little bit about some of the close calls? Because, yeah, I mean,
well, so first of all, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, they were prepared to invade, and the military was demanding permission to invade. And they did not know, and they did not find out until the Cold War ended, that the Cubans already had short range missiles active and ready to use to defend their shores and to hit the United States with in the event of an invasion. And they had permission to use them. They didn't even have to call the Kremlin and ask. They had already been delegated authority down to the Cuban officer level to use atom bombs. And if they had, then that would have been full H-bomb war with the USSR at that point. And then in enforcing the naval blockade, the Navy destroyer was dropping depth charges on Soviet submarines. Now, if you ask them, well, they were just dropping them at a low depth. And everyone knows that that means that we're just telling you to surface, not trying to kill you. But they didn't take it that way. They thought that our guys were trying to kill them. And they were armed with nuclear torpedoes and or nuclear missiles, sub-launched nuclear missiles. And if I have it right, I believe it was the two military officers on board agreed to go ahead and fire the atom bombs in self-defense. And the communist Politburo political officer on board refused to agree. And without the consensus, they couldn't turn the key. But if he wasn't, they didn't have a commissar on every boat. He just happened to be on that one. And so that was what prevented. And again, one atom bomb goes off during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's on, man.
oh yeah,
Full scale H-bomb war, right?
that's what I mean. That's
Yeah. Then, I think probably one of the more famous ones is in 1993. The Norwegians launched a satellite and they warned the Russians, hey, we're going to launch a satellite. Don't freak out. And the Russians said, all right. But they didn't pass the word down the chain of command. Somebody took the day off or got drunk or whatever. And so they launched this satellite. Not only did the Russians think that it was a first strike, but when the rocket separated into its three stages, they said, oh man, look, it's three rockets coming in. It's a first strike, H-bomb first strike. And a guy named, I'm almost certain it was Stanislav Petrov, was the military officer on board on the job that day, who said, I don't know, man. We've been getting along with the United States lately. Bill Clinton's going to do us like this, and this is how it starts with three missiles headed at Moscow, three warheads. I don't know, man. Let me know when the first one hits, and then I'll tell my boss what's up. Now, this was not his job. His job was to pick up the phone and call 10 minutes ago. You know what I mean? He did not do his job. And he said later, he knew his boss was an idiot and an a-hole and would have hit the red button, would have smashed the red button. And he said, nah, man, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and break this circuit. Let's wait and see. And then, of course, it turned out, no, it was false alarm, man. It was just a rocket putting a satellite in space. And at some point that became clear. There was another case where out in Colorado, there's, if you picture the movie War Games, out at Cheyenne Mountain, I'm pretty sure it was there. They had a training tape got left in the computer. And they were sitting there and it was the middle of a Thursday and the computer said, oh my God, full scale Soviet attack right now. And they went and checked over and over and over again. And it kept confirming over and over and over again. And finally someone realized, like, no, stupid. You got the Saturday training tape in there, buddy, and pulled it out. But they were like calling the national security advisor and telling him to wake up the president. We might have to go to full scale war against the Soviet Union. I read a silly novel. It turned out not very good, but it started out, it's called This Is the Way the World Ends. And it starts out a flock of some kind of vulture or crow or something is flying over the North Pole. And the Americans go, oh my God, it's an incoming commie attack. And that has happened before with the radars. The satellites saw flocks of birds and thought that they were incoming missiles. The Soviets, this is something that Ted Postal has written about, is in your mind's eye, you're picturing the super top of the line American badass spy satellites keeping track of the whole world down there, right? You know how it is. You've seen Hollywood and stuff. But then you also make the mistake of imagining that that's what the Russians got too. Nuh-uh. The Russian satellites are a bunch of janky ghetto crap, and they can't see down. They can't find any rocket launch anywhere in the world and all that kind of stuff the way the Americans can. Their stuff is far less sophisticated. They sometimes mistake the moonrise or the sunrise for an incoming nuclear attack.
What?
They have to look across the horizon at the space between outer space, at the atmosphere between outer space and the ground, and they make mistakes all the time. They can get some glint off some silver-lined clouds and think that it's a nuclear attack and can't differentiate. And so you can have mistakes and mistaken interpretations like this. And there are so many more. And there's one where the Air Force dropped two H bombs over North Carolina. And one of them was never found. And the other one, they did find it, and 8 out of 9 fail safes had failed. And if the 9th had failed, they would have nuked North Carolina with a hydrogen bomb in the high kilotons or low megatons, at which case, of course, their choice would have been to admit their mistake or to blame it on Russia and start a war. Which do you think they would do? Place your bets.
Wow. Wow. Place your bets. Oh my God.
And yeah, dude. And so they've had mistakes like this over and over again. And now when I talk about Petrov and him betting on Bill Clinton's goodwill, they've had a few of those. That was the one I remember the story the best, but there's been a few of those where the Russian radar systems said red alert, and a human man on the job said, I don't know. I'm not feeling this. You understand how crucial that is, right? That like instead of silicone wafers, that you just have like wet carbon-based goop deciding instead. They're like, I don't know. It does say the instruments do read, but I'm not quite feeling it in my gut. That's the only thing that saved all of our lives, human civilization, you know? So now we're in the middle of a hot proxy war right on their border. Now, what if the radar goes blip and the mid-ranking officer of undetermined IQ?
What if the sun rises tomorrow, Scott? What are we gonna do?
Yeah, man.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it is. It's that serious. And the thing is about it is, yes, look, for people in your audience, especially like military guys and like right wingers, like, what are you saying? Unilateral disarmament before the Chi-Coms or whatever? Like, no, I'm not saying that. I am saying that it truly, and no matter where you are on the political spectrum, man, or what your religion or any kind of thing, it is unreasonable to think that mankind can just hold on to hydrogen bombs. These called the super megaton-sized explosion-causing machines, and that this can be our overall security environment for the next, 100 years? 200. This is how we're going to do it for the next 200 years. And like, even freeze it now. We got the non-proliferation treaty. And not that Israel, India, or Pakistan are members of it, but for the time being, none of them would dare proliferate. They would piss their patrons off so badly if they did. So right now we have America, Britain, France, Israel, Russia, China, India, and Pakistan holding atom bombs and mostly hydrogen bombs. We don't know if Israel or Pakistan have hydrogen bombs. The rest all certainly do. Oh, did I leave off North Korea? They have atom bombs and potentially boosted atom bombs approaching, thermonuclear weapons. And then, so we're just going to all hold these at each other's heads from now on. But look, man, just don't attack me and I won't nuke your capital city. Okay, deal. You don't attack me and I won't nuke your capital city. Okay, fine. But then you see how quickly that can turn to like, don't you attack me or I'll nuke your capital city, where now it was like, man, we already had a deal. Why are you yelling? You know what I mean? We're like, now all of a sudden things can just escalate so quickly. And where the status quo becomes the definition of the threat of total genocide, right? Of absolute obliteration of another nation. And it's just, it puts us all in the position of essentially, standing, as whatever, members of a society to one degree or another, tolerating or standing behind our state. They're like, we're implicated in this policy of some whatever. I don't know if we're implicated or not. Somehow, I feel like I am. I'm trying to like at least raise my voice about it a little bit to like, we got to reconsider this. And by the way, and maybe this is the most important point I need to remember to make first when we talk about this stuff. Ronald Reagan believed he was on a mission from God to abolish all nuclear weapons from the face of the earth.
Right.
And he came a hair away from doing it at Reykjavik, Iceland in 1986. And 1986, by the way, was 3 years before the wall came down in Berlin. And it was 5 full years before the final end of the Soviet Union. At the time in 1986, Gorbachev was brand new. We didn't even know, like, they had a budding friendship. They were getting along, I guess, an acquaintanceship, Reagan and Gorbachev. But they didn't know, nobody knew that the Cold War was going to end. That, and on top of that, that the Soviet Union was going to unravel and all of Eastern Europe and Islamic South Asia would be free. Are you kidding? Like, nobody thought that. And Reagan was still willing to negotiate away our nukes anyway. And the only thing that sabotaged it was this ridiculous promise of missile defense that they could have never fulfilled. And there was no way in the world they're going to use lasers, space-based laser weapons to shoot down incoming ICBMs in 1980s technology. Probably not even now. And certainly not then. And of course, man, if you negotiate away all the ICBMs, then screw it. Who needs space-based lasers to shoot down ICBMs with? And Ronald Reagan's whole policy was not to be an idiot and a dove and to get screwed by the communists. You might have noticed our regime survived and theirs did not survive the Reagan presidency, right? And so his plan was not to let them get over on us. His plan was, if it hadn't have been ruined by the missile defense crap, his plan was to say, let's see if we can get down to 5,000 each, America and the Soviet Union. We'll ask all of our allies to stop producing new nukes and hold their stockpiles where they are. And then we'll see if we can get down to 1,000 each, and then, or 2,000 each, and then 1,000 each. And then we'll see if we can get down to 500 each. Then we'll see if we can get down to 200. Then we'll be, the Americans and the Soviet Union will be just like Britain and France and China and Israel. Everybody has 200. Let's stop there. This is before India and Pakistan had theirs. Okay. And then the plan was from there. Now that we're all at parity at 200, let's see if we can get everybody down to 100. And of course, if America and the Soviet Union are the big dogs and they're insisting to their friends, the Chinese, the British, the French, the Israelis, that, oh, we're dismantling our atom bombs, all right, and that includes you, pal, then that is how it would have been, right? If that was the course of events, then obviously America and the Soviet Union had the lead on that and could have done it. And Ronald Reagan believed it. And he only blew it by a mistake. He only blew it because he was just too old and he believed his staff that they told him that this was a viable thing and it was worth ruining the deal over, when he could have just as easily said, screw it. That missile defense stuff is a bunch of crap anyway, right? Okay, fine. And signed the damn deal. And in fact, while he was leaving, Gorbachev said, Mr. President, wait, please, let's go back up there and talk about this one more minute. And Reagan goes, forget it.
Oh,
walked away. Probably most crucial mistake in world history or something right there. Could have been.
Yes, absolutely. Like, I mean, what if one of these bombs just frickin' explodes just randomly? And what if it's like next to another one and then another one? Like, oh man.
See, that's the thing is, once they start flying in all the war games, once anybody starts using atom bombs, then everybody starts using them. Use them or lose them. You shoot everything that you got, because if you don't, they're going to nuke your nukes. That's the main purpose of having nukes, is to nuke the other guy's nukes so that they can't nuke you with their nukes. See, and so that means then that if you had nukes, then once they start flying, you better shoot everything you got. That way, they're just nuking empty silos. Too late. And our missiles are already on the way to their sites. And so, or trying to knock out in a first strike their retaliatory capability, something like that. And so, there are plans to try to win a nuclear war. In 2006, in Foreign Affairs, these guys published this article. Now's our opportunity to gain total first strike advantage over Russia. In other words, forget mutually assured destruction. Let's build up our capability to, 1, hit them so hard that they'll have barely anything left, and 2, to build up a missile defense system so that anything that they do have left, we'll be able to shoot that down. That way we can start a nuclear war with Russia and win it before they can do a damn thing about it. And then which is crazy because they still have submarines and they still have mobile missile launchers on trucks. They'd still be able to hit a few of our cities. I mean, what the hell? Like strange love. Well, hey, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed a little bit, a few 100 million dead here, a few million dead here or there. But so then, of course, when W. Bush tore up the anti-ballistic missile treaty, and then these asshole, guys wrote this thing in Foreign Affairs, they're saying that, then what do you think the Russians did? Well, of course, they launched a whole new revolution in nuclear missiles. They made whole new heavy missiles with multiple warheads, up to 24 warheads per heavy rocket now that they can fly around the South Pole. They claim to have nuclear-powered cruise missiles that have essentially unlimited range and can fly around any defenses. We know they have hypersonics, whole new generations of hypersonic missiles that cannot be shot down by any conventional defensive systems that we have. And then they also say that they have these new nuclear torpedoes, which is essentially hydrogen bomb drones that can drive all around the ocean and then take out our naval ports and commercial port cities. And all of this was in direct reaction to W. Bush tearing up the treaty. That was Ronald Reagan's treaty. No, pardon me. That was Richard Nixon's treaty. It was Trump that tore up Ronald Reagan's great INF treaty of 1987. But it was Richard Nixon's anti-ballistic missile treaty that W. Bush tore up that put us on this path. And now they're ahead. I mean, as far as we know, American hypersonics do nothing but fail in their tests. We've seen the Russian hypersonics in action, hitting Mach 8, Mach 10. This is the kind of speeds only our ballistic missiles coming in from space achieve. So, looks like W. Bush started a new arms race and we're losing it. Wow. And the whole thing sucks. Wow. This is the thing that bothers me too is, so I was a kid, I was 14, 15, right around the time that the wall's coming down, the Soviet Union's falling apart. And it's 10 years until the millennium, right? The year 2000. What's it going to be like in the future after the year 2000? We have like this 10-year period of the commies are gone. The Americans are bestride the world as the hyperpower. They get to set the table for the future of mankind, not just with the new decade or even new century, but the new millennium dawning, dude. What's going to be the future of mankind as we move forward past the year 2000? And then it's W. Bush and the Israeli spy neoconservatives just take the empire and drive it straight into the ground with no vision, no care, no identification with actual American values or principles or understandings at all. Got W. Bush out there sounding like Murray Rothbard as he murders 4 million people, talking about freedom and liberty and natural rights and self-government and all this stuff like he's a libertarian, like he's Ron Paul out there, turning the world upside down, led by a bunch of ex-Trotskyite communist, Israeli spy, revolutionary lunatics, Paul Wolfowitz and his crew of criminals. And just, you couldn't have, I was starting to say, back then in the early 90s, and you did have the first Gulf War, and all these questions are being raised about what is the new world order, like lowercase new world order, like what is the new world order going to look like, right? What is it? And then it's just stupid and evil and wrong and nothing but lies and blood and $10 trillion torched like the Joker on the first Nolan Batman there, right? Like, just what in the hell are we doing, everyone? Is this really what we all thought it was going to be like after the year 2000? We're going to, when the world is in our hands, and we're just going to ruin everything? Everything. You name something the Americans didn't touch and set on fire in the last 25 years. It's just a damn disgrace, and I didn't think I could ever hate anybody more than Al Gore. You know what I mean? This ain't a brief for him. But it's hard to imagine America being set on a worse course than under W. Bush's stewardship. Because, you know what? Even take it for what it's worth. Bill Clinton was absolutely the horror show. He was the worst man that you could have possibly had in charge at the end of the 20th century. You wouldn't want that, and you wouldn't want to inherit the presidency from that scumbag after everything that he wrecked when he was in charge. Right? But still, man, it's January 01. It's morning in America, dude. It's a brand new day. It really doesn't matter what Bill Clinton does. He might as well not have ever existed anymore. You're getting sworn in on January 2001. Man, it doesn't matter how bad a position the guy put you in, like relative to where you could have been over the last 10 years. Just look at what you've got. Look at the opportunity that you have. And then hell, even look at September the 12th, when all of humanity was united in sympathy for the United States. We love you guys. What do you want us to do? We demand that you accept lies and kill people with us. What? You know what I mean? They just squandered everything. They just squandered like every bit of our actual capital, every bit of our moral capital, every bit of our face, right? This is America. This is what freedom and liberty means, is this absolute blood-soaked idiocy and hypocrisy. I mean, if you were from Pango or Uruguay or just whatever random stupid country, and you're looking at all this happen in front of you, and what could you possibly think of the United States? You know, here's an anecdote. I'll shut up after this. Right after September 11th, back then, I knew a guy. You'd know him if I told you who he was, but I won't tell you because you'd know who he was. But I knew a guy back then who, he's not even a political guy now. That's why I wouldn't say his name and get him in trouble or anything. But I knew a guy back then who he went to Brazil. And maybe he was in Brazil on September 11th. And you know, like in old movies where something big happens and everybody gathers around the department store window. They're like standing on the sidewalk watching the big news, and the department store window has some TVs there or whatever. He says it was just like that, at a bunch of TVs in the store window. And everybody's gathered around on the sidewalk watching September 11th. And he said they weren't whooping and hollering, but you know what they were doing? They were going like this. They were going, yeah. And that was then. That was before W. Bush and Barack Obama and Donald Trump and Joe Biden killed 4 million people. Sorry, I didn't mean to say billion. 4 million people. That was before all of this. And you might go, geez, what do the Brazilians ever have against us? Oh, I mean, that one fascist dictatorship that murdered all those people that America installed in power in a violent coup d'etat. Like, come on, why you got to bring up old shit? But like, you know what? What if Brazil had overthrown the government of the United States and installed a fascist dictatorship here? You'd think we might have hard feelings about that, you know? And here we don't even have to know what our government has done to those poor people. We don't even have to know why it would be. They're looking at September 11th. They're looking at towers full of civilians. And they're sympathizing with the hijackers. They're not Muslims. They're not trying to kick us out of the Holy Peninsula. They have no direct sympathy for the Bin Ladenite movement. It's just they also have loved ones whose lives have been exterminated by the American CIA. So they kind of get it. And so what does that tell you, right? That either tells you that Brazilians are full of satanic evil, or at least a random sample on the sidewalk in Rio de Janeiro that day, or Sao Paulo that day. Or, man, our government really gives people around the world a reason to resent it the same way that we resent it here. I don't know. Doesn't that kind of sound reasonable? I mean, God, I think about how much I hate the government in Texas. Like, what if the government in Washington really, literally overthrew our governors and installed military dictators that then rounded us up and tortured us and disappeared us and murdered us? That's what Uncle Sam does to them. But they're supposed to see that in any other way different than we would?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I guess it's just odd to me that people are still surprised by this stuff. Like, yeah, it's like Ron Paul told Giuliani in the famous Giuliani moment. He goes, yeah, the CIA coined the term blowback, means consequences from things that the CIA does. Meaning people really hate it when you murder their relatives. That's it.
Crazy, man. Yeah. I mean, I know that younger people seem to be getting more into politics and learning about well, I was going to say learning about history, but like just like face value stuff. Like they don't seem to uh, want to do the digging and understanding of the actual histories of various countries, and especially not the country that they live in. Uh, and then a lot of them, you see a lot of people just hating on their own country, like the United States now, for what they did years ago, even before World War II. Um, you see a lot of like, especially on social media, you see a lot of like Hitler postings, like, well, Hitler wasn't that bad because of this and because of that, and um, Holocaust denier stuff coming out more and more. Um, so I mean,
People don't know anything, man. I saw one
yeah,
where
why would you
they were
expect?
doing DNA tests, and they were asking all these Mexican Americans about their DNA test results, and like there was a viral thing going on. They were all so horrified to find out that they were in fact white, and that Rodriguez and Hernandez are European names, dude, because guess why they call your language Spanish, you stupids? It's because your land was settled by Spaniards. Did you really think that you're a pure Indian? Did you think that Mexican was a race? Do you know how to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth? How could anyone be so goddamned dumb? You know? And they're like, oh, I'm horrified to find out I have European ancestry. Dude, unless you are from way out in the Mexican countryside, you
Yeah.
have European ancestry, folks. I guess. Yeah, I don't know. And they're like, no, I thought I was 100% Mexican. Yet I thought my DNA test would say Texan, but it came back Scotch Irish and English and what, like what are they talking about, dude? They're anyway. Yeah, it's a bad time. It's Bill Hicks had a thing about this before he died in like 93. But like this was the advent of digital, like right at the cusp of the digital age, where he's like, right now we have the most geniuses, the most brilliant scientists, the finest artistic and literary minds in the world. And what do? We burn Debbie Gibson onto a CD. Shake your love. Shake your love. This is what we value. This is what we're doing. This is what we're going to save for all time, burned onto this like fancy new digital medium. And while all this genius comes and goes, right?
Yeah, no, that's good. Bill Hicks is great for sure. So just to wrap up the Russia Ukraine topic, I mean, where, based on your understanding, where are things at today, and what are your thoughts on the outcome?
Yeah,
Or,
well, look, I mean,
that
okay.
doesn't happen anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was, Russia invaded and their goal was to drive Ukraine to the table, which they did. And then the Americans and the Brits came and ruined the talks. They could have succeeded in March and April, and it could have been a very short war. The Americans came in and promised, we will give you all the weapons you need to to completely destroy the Russian army and drive them out of Ukraine. And they never meant that. And Ukraine never had the manpower to do it anyway, even if we'd given them everything we had. The whole thing was a lie in the first place. And as they said at the time, as you and your audience remember, they said at the time, well, we just want to inflict on them a strategic defeat. And they would say over and over and over again, we're killing Russians. We're killing them. We're sending them home in body bags. We're sending them home in coffins. We're issuing great cost to the Russian country, state, society by killing their men. And we're not losing any soldiers at all. And they would, many times, I have the quotes in the book, many times they just not even mention the Ukrainian soldiers at all. The Ukrainians here are just extras in our movie. Their job, they're like the black guy on Star Trek. Their job is to die, to be, useful sacrifices in our effort to bog the Russians down and replicate the 1980s war in Afghanistan. Where, of course, again, the idea was we don't care if the Soviets kill 1 million Afghans crushing this insurgency. It's going to hurt them. And that's all we care about. And same thing here. Our government, Washington, doesn't give a damn about the Ukrainians. They made it so clear. They just want to prolong the war as long as they can to weaken Russia. Now, Putin said before he invaded, man, I think they're trying to trap me into this thing. However, I might have to take the bait and do it anyway, because they might actually have figured out how to leave me no choice but to do it. But he could see that they were walking him into a trap. And he had to make the measure and decided to go ahead, which again, I think was a mistake and that he'll ultimately regret it. But so now they did, in fact, provide the Ukrainians enough weaponry and especially intelligence, right? We got the satellites, man. We can, really be a great help to the Ukrainians in aiming their weapons and in targeting enemy forces on the battlefield. It has made the difference in helping them hold the line. They can never reverse it and drive the Russians out. But they have been able to lose slowly for the last 3 years. And, and plus. And then, so the Russians then are winning slowly. Both sides say that their policy is to win a war of attrition. In other words, they're not simply trying to seize territory. They're trying to find good places to trap enemy groups into dying in large numbers and grinding the other side's forces down. The Ukrainians say that they're doing the same thing to the Russians, that they're not trying to drive the Russians out. Don't let the map fool you. We're grinding them down until the Russians break, and then we'll drive them all the way out. Well, that's what the Russians, and I think time is on the Russian side here. That's what the Russians say their policy is too. So they're going to keep fighting until the Ukrainian military breaks, and then the Russians will be able to walk around and take whatever they want, presumably everything east of the river and possibly Kherson west of the river. And then that raises the question of whether they're going to try to take Odessa. And you know what? They might not take. They've so far not claimed that they are annexing Kharkiv and Sumy and Dnipropetrovsk and some of the other oblasts east of the river. They say that they have officially annexed and they have in practice annexed all of Luhansk, but they only control, and sorry to finish, they claim to have annexed all of Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, but they only control 3/4 of Donetsk, probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of Zaporozhye, and about 2/3 of Kherson. And again, a third of Kherson is on the western side of the river there. So they're not taking that until they've completely destroyed the Ukrainian military and have their run of the place and can go wherever they want unhindered, because it ain't easy to cross that river under fire, as the Ukrainians have learned in their failed, desperate attempts to retake the other side of Kherson there over the last couple of years. So it's an absolute horrible, bloody, muddy slog of a war. It's picture World War I at a slightly lower intensity. You don't have tens of thousands of people dying at a time in massive waves of battles like that, but you do have, very intense shelling and muddy trenches and, tank rounds and artillery war mostly, and then plus drones and plus
drones.
yeah, and then plus the Soviets figured out how they could add, what an American JDAM kit is, the Joint Direct Attack Munition. It's essentially a guidance kit that they can fit onto a dumb bomb and turn it into a satellite guided and or laser guided bomb. And the paveway is basically the same thing. I believe the JDAM is for moving targets and the paveway is for stationary targets. It might be the other way around, I forget. But basically, it's a guidance kit. Well, the Russians now have their own JDAM type kit, and they found these massive storehouses full of Khrushchev's old dumb bombs from the 60s that they can now tack these guidance kits to for 55 cents or whatever and go ahead and fire them at Ukrainian troops at standoff ranges. So now you're talking, from 50 to 2,000 pound bombs that they can drop from inside Russia, from fighter jets inside Russia and hit beyond Ukrainian lines. And so just devastating attacks. And then even when, they're not falling supersonic or anything, so you can shoot them down. But at what cost? How many Patriot missiles are you going to shoot at a dumb bomb falling out of the sky? You know what I mean? And when eventually it makes no sense. And they'll shoot quite a few in a row. The missile interceptor will shoot them down, but the last one hits the interceptor itself, right? When they have 6 interceptor missiles, we shoot 7 bombs at it, right? One gets through.
Yeah.
Wow. So it just sucks. It just sucks. And for all sides, they're getting, and you can't believe either side when they play down their own numbers and and play up the other side's casualties, but I think it's safe to say that both sides have probably north of 500,000 killed and wounded. Um, Certainly, into the mid hundreds of thousands killed probably for both sides. I don't know, man, exactly. I you can't really trust the numbers. I like conservative ones rather
Yeah.
than,
Yeah.
high ones, but whatever. It's still an absolute catastrophe for everybody. Um, and then, so sorry to wrap up, the Russians are going to win eventually. And I don't think that Donald Trump can do a thing to talk them out of it, which he thinks he can with, threats and promises, but I just think he doesn't hold any cards. The cards are we can add sanctions and we can pour in more weapons, but Biden already tried that. And the carrots are we can normalize relations, but I think Trump is only willing to go so far and only able to go so far, which is probably farther than he's willing to go. But by the constraints of Washington, I don't think he can do what it would really take to make friends with Russia again so much that they'd be willing to call timeout on the war where it is now. I mean, what are you going to do? Give the guy personally gold bricks or something? I mean, and because you normalize relations with him, how's he going to trust that Washington is going to stick with any bargain we make when everybody knows that all of the rest of DC hates his guts and wants nothing to do with the Russian Federation whatsoever and would love to break any deal that Donald Trump makes? And as we have seen, W. Bush has no trouble tearing up, Nixon's treaties with the Soviet Union and the Russians, Bill Clinton's deal with the North Koreans. W. Bush comes in, tears up Nixon's treaty. Barack Obama comes in, tears up W. Bush's agreement with Muammar Gaddafi and invades him. Donald Trump comes in, tears up Obama's agreement with Iran, and later on follows up by bombing them. And so, the precedent is there. They're like, you just can't believe the Americans. They'll say anything, and they'll, oh, and never mind, of course, Bill Clinton, Bush, and Obama and Trump all violating Bush Sr.'s promises not to expand NATO, which they turned around and did. You know what I mean? So, so if you're the Kremlin and Donald Trump goes, no, trust me, dog, it's going to be fine. You go, no, it's not going to be fine because President Chelsea Clinton is going to ruin everything in 3 years.
I mean, it's like 4 year. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like they only get 4, maybe 8-year terms. So
it would have to be like some full on Ronald Reagan level charisma and a willingness to follow through that I think Trump just doesn't have. And quite frankly, like there may be nothing that'll work now. From Putin's point of view, I think he's in this and he's in it to win it as far as the goals that he's already stated. And there were a couple trial balloons that maybe they'd be willing to climb down on territorial gains in the south of the country if they can keep all of Donetsk. But then we're never even going to see that tested because the Ukrainians are not willing to give in on Donetsk. And Trump is not willing to tell Kiev, give in on Donetsk. You know what I mean? Which he would have to do. And you see, by the way, and I'm not arguing, I should stop saying this because I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for the guy or I'm arguing this point of view on the thing. I'm for total non-intervention starting a long time ago. But I'm just saying, I do understand why it's much more difficult politically to leave Ukraine high and dry to be crushed compared to, say, calling off his pit bull and Netanyahu mercilessly slaughtering the helpless Palestinians. This is more like if we were backing the Palestinians while they were being mercilessly slaughtered, and then we turn around and leave them high and dry so the Israelis can go ahead and finish the job. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And so politically, it's a lot easier to call off the bully than it is to call off the victim. And in this case, even though it is Joe Biden's fault for putting Ukraine in this position in a great many ways, of course, it is Russia, the much greater power that has invaded their smaller, weaker neighbor. And so to turn around on Kiev and tell them, like he claimed to say at the beginning of his second term here, that no, really, we're cutting you off. No more weapons from us. And for that matter, no more intelligence. See, here's the thing, too. I don't know where he got this idea, if they even talked about this, or this is just his instinct and he didn't think it through or what. Remember when he first came in, he started trashing Zelensky immediately.
Right.
It seemed to me like that was a really bad way to play that hand, because it would have been better to just, again, all other things being equal here, it would have been better to present a somewhat united front to Putin and say, look, I like Zelensky. Me and Zelensky are getting along fine here. On the other hand, I like you. And I'd like to work something out here. You know what I mean? But by letting Zelensky know that, like, screw you, pal, I'm cutting you loose or whatever. And that meant that Zelensky was like not even trying to consider, like, what do I have to do to stay in Trump's good graces? Right? He was like, well, I'm already cut off. I guess I'll just go to England and ask them for more money. I guess I'll just go to Germany and ask them for more guns. Because if that's how the Americans are going to be, and then it helped to negate Trump's ability to use Zelensky and his government as its own card against Russia. Like, look, man, I get along great with Zelensky and his people. We could keep this going. And look, here we are having this conversation in October when Trump is giving them weapons and is helping keep this going, right? Is authorizing strikes, is adding new sanctions. So, again, all other things being equal, he could have just been a lot clearer about it in the first place. That actually, this is all Joe Biden's fault, but I am willing to play his same game until I get what I want. I am Donald Trump. I have spoken, right?
Right.
And he did not do that, right? He did not do that. And so now here he is. He's sort of fumbled the thing. Now we're a few months into this and he's backtracking on his abandoning of Kiev. And yet he doesn't have a plan to see the thing through. It would have been better if he had just realized in the first place that he doesn't really have any cards to play and that he could ask Putin, like, hey, man, that it would make it a lot easier for me and for us to work together if you would wrap this thing up sooner than later, but without, trying to play a bunch of cards that he doesn't really hold. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. Anyway, and the problem there is, right, is it's better to just sit there than to swing and miss. Because now that he's talked a big game, then he looks like a jerk for not being able to finish the job and make it all okay. So here he said, nah, we're going to go to Budapest and hammer out the final details. Then he has to cancel that and say, actually, we're not going to Budapest because there are no final details to hammer out. Why? Because I don't know what happened as the prelude to that statement, but I know that after that, Rubio talked to Lavrov and we're not going to Budapest. There's no final details to be hammered out here. Lavrov made it clear to Rubio that we're not backing down, pal. We're not stopping. And Trump said, oh, yeah, well, I'm putting new sanctions on your oil companies. And Putin said, this is marginal. We're not worried about that. It's on the front page of antiwar.com. Putin, what's the word for it? Sloughs off, whatever, ignores sanctions, plays down effective new sanctions. So go ahead, and I'm not stopping, is his point. And it just sucks because I really do believe that Trump was sincere in wanting to end this war. I just think he can't. And damn Joe Biden, he's probably too senile to even remember that this stuff is going on and that it's all his fault.
Right. Yeah, no kidding, man. I wonder what he's thinking, if anything.
Yeah, nothing. He's thinking about his asshole cancer.
Right, if he even remembers that. So let's say Russia wins, they get, close to or equivalent to what they wanted. I mean, do you think what's stopping them from, like, waiting a year or something and starting a whole new war?
Cost. This isn't about them having territorial appetite. This is about them solving a conflict on their border that America caused to happen. Obama and Joe Biden did in 2014. It was an ongoing civil war and an actual ass emergency. Now, again, I don't think that he had to do what he did, but he did not just say, yeah, I think I'd like to take Eastern Ukraine now. That's not how this started. Okay. And that's how they lie and say it was an unprovoked attack and all of that. So there is a problem, and this could become a problem in the future, that the Soviet Empire, and before that, the Russian Empire, had transplanted Russian peoples into these other countries. You had millions of Russians living in Ukraine, living in Kazakhstan, especially, and I don't know how many hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands living in Estonia and in Lithuania and Latvia, in various population numbers. I forget exactly, but this is what this one demographer, I forgot, I got his book. He calls it a beached diaspora. In other words, the nation itself receded and left the people behind, right? And so, like the Germanic people of Eastern Europe who got left behind when the Third Reich was destroyed by the Soviets, right? And then they were all people without a country and then were cleansed and forced to go back west into Germany. So here you have these Russians left behind. Now, if you're the Russian government, those people are your responsibility, sorta, right? Now, as long as they're okay, then it's okay. But if they're not, then you may have to do something about that, right? So right now, there are Russians who live in Estonia who are free. They don't really have big problems. They're certainly not being, disappeared and tortured and murdered and shelled and bombed by their central government. And so the central government of Estonia is not giving the Russians a good goddamn excuse to go in there and claim to be protecting the people of the Russian towns in the east of their country that used to be Russian territory where these Russian peoples live. And I forget, is it Nesta? I always forget. I'm sorry. I always forget the name of this town. There's a town in eastern Estonia that's just an entirely Russian town. Yeah, correct me. Would you? I always get it wrong. I know that's not right. I'm stupid. It's this very Russian town in eastern Estonia where there's been a question. There's been some like minor threats where like they were being very minorly oppressed on voting rights or something. And the Russians said like, hey, don't make me upset about this.
Narva?
You got it? Narva. That's it. Yeah. That must be it. Yeah. I'm an idiot. I don't know why I said that. I don't know what I'm thinking of.
Hey,
Is
man,
that like kind of
that's the first thing you kind of blipped on. So don't call yourself an idiot, man. You're cooking. So don't worry about that.
Is that like a kind of canned iced tea or something? I don't know where I got Nesta. Narva. Okay. So, right. So there are no pogroms going on in Narva right now. So if Putin gets up there and starts banging his fist and saying, I want Narva back, people in Russia are going to say, come on, like we're going to fight Estonia. We're going to fight NATO over Narva when everything's fine in Narva, dude. Right. But the thing is, the central government of Estonia would be wise to keep things copacetic over there in Narva so that there's nothing to fight about, right? And so this is the reality almost everywhere in the world, right? Even France and Germany don't have their borders drawn around the French people and the Germanic people, right? There are, for example, millions of Germans, like I think 2 million Germans live in France right now. But we don't even know that because there's not even a controversy about it. Because is it Alsace and Lorraine, I guess? Or whatever. I don't know. Europe, man. I'm an American. But they're free, so it doesn't matter. They go to whatever church they want. They have their own representatives, their own whatever protections of law, and they're not afraid, and so it's okay. Right. And same thing for the South Tyrol, which is like northern Italy, which is ruled by Germany. Same thing for, hell, look at Bosnia, where you have a central government, but you also have the Republic Srpska that is sovereign, but not independent. You understand? Like, whatever, man. You figure it out. You come up with a tri-national state. They have Croatians there too. You come up with a way to have 3 countries in one republic inside a nation state, however you call it. Figure it out, right? Strong federalism. This was the proposal for solving the problem in Ukraine. We'll have essentially like statehood for the Donbass, for Luhansk and Donetsk. And so instead of being large counties, they will really be federal republics, but still within the nation state of Ukraine. Why can't that be good enough? God dang it. You know what I mean? And like, but they are different peoples. And that was a lot of what they're fighting about is you have, once Obama and Biden overthrew the government there in 2014, you have hardcore right-wing nationalists from the far west of the country who insist on forcing their culture on everybody else, even though it's a very different thing. Take this analogy, man. Let's say the American Empire fell. And then not only that, even the American Republic, the country here, lost everything west of the Mississippi River. And like, the Chi-Coms got the Northwest and Mexico retook the Southwest. And, I don't know, the Midwest broke off, made its own thing, or joined with the damn Canadians or some kind of thing. And then
I'm Canadian.
Sorry.
All
and then
good.
The Mexicans retook Texas, right? Where the population is, let's just guess and say 50-50 Hispanic and Anglo, right? But everything was basically fine for a long time. But then the government in Mexico City started trying to outlaw guns and slavery again. Oh, I'm sorry. Never mind the slavery part. Then they try to outlaw and take our guns away again, like last time. And then on top of that, outlaw Protestant churches and start oppressing the English language and saying, no, all government documents have to only be in Spanish now, and all of these things, right? And waging that level of a pro-Hispanic, anti-Anglo culture war inside New Texas, right? Well, what's left of the United States of America east of the Mississippi River do about that? Nothing. They start a civil war. Now the Anglos are fighting to hold on to Dallas and Lubbock and Wichita Falls, and the Hispanic armies are coming to cleanse them all out of there and to force them to go to Catholic Church and whatever. Presumably, if we didn't just have like rainbow flag communism over Washington at that point, and we had, something like the remnant of the old United States in charge in Washington, they would invade. They would cross the river and they would take back as much of Anglo Texas as they could in the name of protecting those people. Absolutely. And you might say, oh, come on. Like the new regime in Washington really cares about the Anglos of Dallas. Fine, they don't. Of course they don't. They're politicians. They don't care about anything but themselves. But they would claim that mandate, wouldn't they? We're not just going to let the government in Mexico City completely destroy the rights of the people who used to be Americans in good standing, with rights protected in good standing under the American Republic, who are now going to be what? Abject slaves of the other ethnicity that is the other half of the population of their state. That's the kind of situation that we're talking about here, where you have, and it's not that every ethnic Russian in Russia necessarily wanted to rejoin the Russian Federation. It's just that they were oppressed enough that Moscow had the excuse to protect them. And many of them, they did vote for independence from Kiev, and many of them did support joining the Russian Federation, although I think it's far from clear exactly what percent. Just to reverse my metaphor around, just like there are a lot of Hispanics, and including Mexican nationals and their children in Texas now, who have no intention of rejoining Mexico whatsoever, who don't want to be Mexicans at all. That's why they live here. They want to be Americans. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing there. We have people who, they're Russians, but they're Ukrainians. They're Russian Ukrainians. Doesn't mean they want to be citizens of the Russian Federation. However, when the Nazis of far western Ukraine are inflicting a massive right-wing culture war against all the people in the east of the country, and including a actual violent and deadly civil war against them to conquer them and subject them, then that was a huge part of the excuse that Moscow invoked to go ahead and cross the line and invade when they did in 22.
Before we, do you have a bit of time to talk about Israel-Palestine still? A little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Before we move on to that, can you just briefly talk a little bit about, I caught your interview with, I believe it was on Piers Morgan. You were talking about National Socialism in Ukraine. And you're talking about Beletsky. Can you get into that for like a minute or two before we move on?
Yes, I was just saying, I mean, there are real ass Nazis in Ukraine. They're the legacy of the Nazi movements from between the world wars and in the World War II era. Their great-grandfathers did serve Hitler and Himmler in the, in the SS during the war and helped to perpetrate the Holocaust. After World War II, they were inherited by the U.S. Army and the CIA, who ran them as essentially right-wing militias resisting communist dominance in the country until about 1954. And then with the fall of the Soviet Union, all their expatriates who've been living in the United States and Canada started coming home and started working very hard on building a culture of hero worship around the Nazis of the World War II era, especially a guy named Stepan Bandera and his men from what was then called the OUN, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. And they were avowed Hitlerians, in their own words, 100%, the Ukrainian clone version of Mussolini's fascism, Hitler's National Socialism, the Croatian Ustaši's Nazism, and the rest. That, like, we're with you guys, man. We're a Reich too, and this and that, whatever. So, Ukrainian nationalism doesn't have any George Washingtons and Nathaniel Greens. They just have a bunch of scumbag Hitlerians. And so this is who they had to try to make heroes out of. So half of that is trying to play down what Nazi war criminal, Holocaust committing lunatics they were. The other part is, building and encouraging a society based on reverence for these Nazis and their ideals. And so they're playing it down on one hand. They're really founding a new Ukraine on this ideology on the other hand. And these are the people who they helped in part with the Orange Revolution, fake revolution coup in 2004. And then they took the lead and accomplished the street putsch that overthrew the government in 2014. And then they're the ones who started the Civil War. It was, John Brennan's request that the government launch the Civil War against the people of the East who refused to accept the authority of the new regime. I got an audio problem here. A little echo coming through. Check, check. Okay, it's okay again. But see, when the military, a huge part of the military defected to the other side, and they were unprepared to launch this Civil War. Well, so the Nazis rushed to the front and led the way. And that was what was now called the Azov Battalion, along with C-14 and Right Sector, the Adar Battalion, the Tornado Battalion, and these other Nazi groups. And they're fighting to this day. The Azov Battalion is now split between what's now called the 3rd Army Corps, led by Andriy Beletsky, and the 12th Separate Infantry, the 12th Special Purpose Brigade of the National Guard. Right Sector and C-14 are still independent militias out there fighting. And their worst leaders, Dmitry Yarash, Ola Tanibok, they are both, Yarash is an advisor to the commander-in-chief of the military. Tanibok is one of the leaders of the National Guard, the 12th Special Operations Brigade there. And as I say, Beletsky is now a general, a brigadier general, and commander of the 3rd Army Corps, which has its own chain of command, its own very special separate chain of command, which I think probably under CIA control and working directly with a direct link to Kiev and the Western governments rather than having to go through the rest of the chain of command. And the only silver lining here is that a bereaving father shot Andriy Parubi in the head in an assassination on the streets of Lviv a couple of months ago. He was another one of these most dangerous Ukrainian Nazis. And so at least we don't have to worry about him. But, me and my partner, John Weeks, wrote an article for antiwar.com a few weeks back called Blitzkrieg Blowback. And it's about Andriy Beletsky and my warning that he is incredibly ambitious and would seek to be the Führer, would seek to be the dictator of Ukraine after Zelensky, and has made his ambitions absolutely clear. And he is, and I republished his essay. It's called Racial Social Nationalism, which some funny guy on Twitter goes, Scott, what's the problem, dude? Social nationalism. Don't you get it? It's the exact opposite of National Socialism. And so this guy, he wrote Racial Social Nationalism, and you can read it, and it is absolutely insane, harebrained, lunatic, Aryan claptrap, right? Hitlerian lunacy, right? Straight out of, what the most methed up kook in Idaho's, Facebook page or whatever, kind of crap. And so first of all, yes, they're extremely dangerous, leaders at war, but also there's this entire massive Azov movement in the country. And this is a big part of what caused the war is the sentiments led by these people are essentially trying to outlaw the pro-Russian culture in the east of the country. They tried and failed, but they did try to outlaw Russian as an official language, which was a massive declaration of culture war. Even though they didn't follow through, they did try. And then they also moved to severely limit the amount of Russian language allowed to be spoken on TV, on radio, in books, in the libraries, and all of these things. They renamed all the streets, certainly in the west of the country, and they're trying to redo it all over the entire country, rename the streets after all their Hitlerian heroes who, I guess sort of kind of, if you want, heroically resisted the Soviets, but on behalf of Hitler and Himmler. So not exactly heroically if you want to take the Second World War into total context there, guys. And as I show in the book, they absolutely helped commit the Holocaust against innocent Jewish and Polish civilians, men, women, and children in extremely high numbers, at least high tens of thousands, while the Germans, of course, killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands. At least 800,000 Jews were killed in Ukraine in the Holocaust by the Germans mostly, but with the help of these Ukrainian kooks as well. And then, as I show in the book, it literally is the great-grandsons and the grandsons and great-grandsons of these men who founded the organizations who are leading the Ukrainian regime at war right now. And they just play this down there. Oh, man, you know what? Your conservative Republican next door neighbor that you see on Sunday morning out mowing the lawn, he's a Nazi. But these Nazis, oh, they're cool, man. You know, they're just moderate rebels and they're just trying to do a good thing and holding back the real Hitler, Vladimir Putin. Of course, if you know anything about Putin, he's actually a center-right conservative Republican, right? He's like a bit of a nationalist, but not really. Like he's much more like on a scale of even like Jeb Bush to Pat Buchanan. Putin is more of a Bush than a Buchanan, even. You know what I mean? Buchanan would be like, hey, this is a white man's land, boy, at least sometimes or whatever. Putin never talks like that. Putin is like, no way, this is a multiracial nation, dude. Like, how in the world are we going to be ethnic Russian chauvinists when our nation encompasses so many other peoples? No way, dude. And he puts people like that in prison. You know what I mean? He ruthlessly cracks down on Nazi groups inside Russia because they're a threat to him. They hate his guts because he's a moderate. But then, no, whatever, actual National Socialists, as long as they're fighting on the Ukrainian side, it's all good, dude. Even if their grandfather served Hitler murdering Jews in the Holocaust, then like, yeah, but dude, didn't you hear Joe Biden mumbled something about Neville Chamberlain, and so it's on.
You're great, Scott. I look forward to checking out the book. So let's move to Israel Palestine for just a little bit. I just have a few questions. Can you start with, like, you don't have to go too much into detail, but can you give a little bit of a history of Palestine in terms of, especially in terms of their, I guess their political strife for like a two-state solution. I know that, like I did mention to you, when you watch a show, for example, and it's maybe a debate about this issue, a talking point is always the two-state solution, and that Palestine's been offered it before. Some deny that, some push on that. So can you just get into that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. First of all, though, be careful because I think you're bumping your microphone some there. So I don't know if your jacket's rubbing on something or something.
Oh,
I was hearing a little something rubbing on your mic foam. It sounded like so.
Okay.
Now, well, okay. So put off the two-state solution for a second.
Sure.
Well, oh, what the hell? No, it's part and parcel of the whole story, I guess. First of all, people want the real long-form take on this. You got to tune in to Martyr Made and Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem. It's a wonderful 25-hour-long podcast series that ends with the founding of Israel in 48. So it's the whole prequel to that. With the founding of the Zionist movement. In the age of nationalism in Eastern Europe, the Jews didn't have their own state. And so there was a faction called the Zionists who decided they wanted to figure out where they could go and create their own Jewish state. And for various reasons, they decided on Palestine, including obviously some ancient historical ties and that kind of thing. And so they created this movement to go to Palestine. Now, most European Jews and American Jews were opposed to this. The religious and Reform Jews of all different descriptions said that this was a bad idea. But then after the Second World War and the Holocaust, they said, all right, fine, I guess, yeah, we better do that. So then they ended up moving the vast majority of European Jews, and I don't know how many American Jews joined them, but certainly the European Jews then went ahead and were moved with the help of the Allies, particularly the British, to go to Palestine, where then they launched a war against the British occupation. They had taken over the place after World War I, and they waged a terrorist war to force the British to withdraw, and then they declared a state. Now, they were, I'm sorry, man, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but it was something like they were 10% of the population and owned 3% of the land. And then they tried to declare a state over all of it, something like that. They're a small minority of the population and of the legitimate landowners. And they just went to declare this state. Now, you'll hear them all the time go, oh, yeah, but the UN said they could. Yeah, well, first of all, Are you kidding me? You think the UN can declare that one group of people have the right to steal a country from another group of people? What are you, stupid? And then not only that, but the UN General Assembly declared that. That's supposed to end discussion. Give me a break, dude. That's like, oh, Scott Horton said I could rob that bank. Yeah, well, he doesn't have the authority to give you permission to do that. So what the hell are you talking about? Doesn't mean anything at all. And then, by the way, in that same recommendation, they said the Palestinians should get a state too. Oh, yeah. Oh, is that right, huh? And of course, the map was completely screwy. It was, drawn by American scientists, basically, that forced the issue. The UN General Assembly at that time was like 20 countries, and they were all completely under the thumb of the United States, of course. Nothing like what they're trying to make you believe that meant. Like, oh, all of humanity agreed that the Palestinians would just have to suck it. No, that's not what happened. But anyway, the Americans agreed. And so the Israelis created their state, and then Golda Meir went and made a secret deal with the king of Jordan that he could keep the West Bank, and the Egyptians could keep the Gaza Strip. Although I'm not sure they made a deal for that. That may have just been when the Americans called a halt to the war. And Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. But by making the secret deal with the king of Jordan, that meant that the Palestinians could never have their state. The king of Jordan would be their ruler, and they would never get their independence, which was great from the Israelis' point of view, because that meant that they could just take that land someday, when it comes to a contest from the king of Jordan. There won't be a Palestinian state for them to destroy. They'll never get it. It was sabotage from the beginning. Now, in the creation of the state, they always claim, yeah, the Israelis, boy, they were just trying to be a nice little Jewish boy. And then all the Arab states invaded to kill them for no reason except for the evil of Islam and whatever. Come on, man. What actually happened was they were ruthlessly raping and murdering the local population in order to steal their property. Oh, a land without people. Oh, yeah, it turns out that in the year 1947, the eastern shore of the Mediterranean had not been settled. How do you like that? A land without people. For a people without land. Yeah, see how that's a lie. They had to murder the people and rape their children and force them to flee at gun and bayonet point so they could steal their land. Right? And crime, evil, all of it from the beginning, founded in blood and rape and murder and lies from the get-go. And they cleansed 750,000 people off of their land. That is the population of Greater Austin, Texas, were forced marched from all of their territory. And I mean Greater Austin, not the city limits, but like between Round Rock and Buda. I mean, all of Greater Austin would be the number of people that we're talking that were forced off of their land and forced into refugee camps in neighboring states and the rest. Now, when they did that, it was evil as it was, and yet, just from a descriptive point of view, it was sustainable. Because what they did was they created an 80-20 super duper Jewish majority state. There's still 1/5 of the population who are still within the borders that they claimed that were Muslims or Christian Palestinians. But they had an 80-20 super duper majority. So they could claim to be a Jewish state and a democracy and claim to like suck up to the West and pretend to have some Western values and these kinds of things. However, in 1967, Israel started an aggressive war against Egypt. Of course, they'll lie and claim it was preemptive. Yeah, like that time George W. Bush preemptively invaded Iraq to protect us from them. Give me a break. That's what liars say when they're committing an act of aggressive war. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what Tojo said about the attack on Pearl Harbor. Oh, it was a preemptive attack. That's self-defense in advance, bro. Trust me. Anyway, so Israel aggressively launched an aggressive sneak attack war on Egypt, lied and called it self-defense, as Zionists do. And then in that war, Jordan and Syria also jumped in. And with American help, not direct help, but resupply and so forth, the Israelis defeated the Egyptians, the Syrians, and the Jordanians in the Six-Day War, and they took control of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank from Egypt and from Jordan. Now, when they did that, They were able to cleanse another 250,000 people off of their land in Israel proper into the West Bank. But essentially, they kidnapped all those people on that land. They were not able to cleanse that territory for political reasons, I guess, in Europe and America. They were not able to cleanse that territory of all the Palestinians that lived on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So they didn't just steal their property. They kidnapped them all, millions of them. And then they said, oh, no, now what are we going to do with them? And the answer was they'll turn to unmitigated evil, and they will wage a totalitarian regime of foreign military martial law worse than Soviet communism under the poor, helpless captives of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, because those people have all committed the crime of being born not Jewish. So they must either die or at least get used to living as slaves, as rightless helots on their bellies, complete subjects of a foreign military occupation, a boot on their neck, no different than the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto under Nazi control during World War II, only for longer than the Soviets even occupied Eastern Europe, right? From 1967 through today, right? So almost 60 years, 58 years, right? Help me with my math if I screwed that up. So, 9 years longer than I've been alive, and I'm 49. So yeah. That's the situation on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And what happens is, importantly, in 1992 or 1990, I think in 1992, Yitzhak Rabin, or maybe it was early 93, Yitzhak Rabin becomes the prime minister. And Yitzhak Rabin has a policy that he's from the Labor Party. And he says he wants to negotiate with the Arab states and make a deal with Yasser Arafat for a two-state solution. Now, this was not going to be a real independent state. It was going to be something like we talked about before for Ukraine, like a binational state, where it's still one real nation with one foreign policy, for example, but the Palestinians would be able to have their own police forces and their own court systems and their own more or less, hopefully emphasis on more, self-rule in their own territories, where they really would have freedom and prosperity and not under a fiction, but like actually not be under foreign martial law, right? But have some stake in a binational state of some kind. And it was a cop-out. It was made to placate the West and not be a true state and all that. I get that, but it was certainly better than anything that's been on offer since then. That was essentially the idea, was to give them something like a state. But then the thing is, he was murdered by a Netanyahu fan in 1995. Right. He was replaced by Shimon Peres, who was, I guess, sincere in following and wanting to follow through, but didn't have a chance to, before he was unseated by Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996. And Netanyahu is, again, from the Likud, the party of Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir and the other, most merciless terrorists of the founding era. And he came in and said, we're not doing Oslo. We're not doing a two-state solution. Forget that. And this is when they adopted the American neoconservatives' advice, the clean break strategy. And you might have heard of that in my numerous rants about American foreign policy, and particularly regarding the invasion of Iraq. Yeah. Well, the whole thing was based around the clean break. Well, what's the clean break? The clean break is advice from American neoconservatives to Netanyahu to make a clean break with Oslo, a clean break with the Rabin policy of making peace with the Palestinians. Instead, what we're going to do, we're going to murder them and steal their land. But that's going to be difficult to do when we have Hezbollah on our northern flank and they're armed by Iran by way of Syria. And so that's why we need to get America to overthrow Saddam Hussein for us, because then they idiotically believed, because they had been lied to and are fools, as well as premeditated murderers, that Turkey and Jordan will be dominant in the new Saddam Hussein-less Iraq. And then the new Saddam Hussein-less Iraqi Shia under Jordanian and Turkish dominance will force Hezbollah to be nice to Israel and stop being friends with Iran. That's what an idiot David Wurmser and his buddy Richard Pearl are. That's what they thought would happen. And that was what Netanyahu also believed, that the lies of Ahmed Chalabi, that all this is going to be great for Israel. And that was why he was so obsessed with getting rid of Saddam Hussein, was all in the name of thwarting the Palestinian state. Now, he ended up being replaced by Ehud Barak, who you'll know from reading the New York Post is a brutal rapist and very best friend of Jeffrey Epstein, who comes to America and pays money to rape American girls, along with the businessmen and politicians and scientists that his agent Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing in, for Greater Zion. People be like, man, I hate that Jeffrey Epstein having young American children raped. But at least it was for a good cause. Blackmailing American servants of Israel. Very crucial in order, if you really want Jesus to come back. He demands that you go along with stuff like that. It's right there in the Schofield inscriptions in the margin of my Bible, somewhere. Anyway, so Ehud Barak, the savage rapist, he came in and he pretended to negotiate under the auspices of Bill Clinton at Camp David. And this is the rumor that you're referring to, the propaganda that you hear repeated over and over again. Tell me if this really makes sense to you. The Israelis gave the Palestinians everything, including the moon and some waffles. And the Palestinians said no. Why? They did not want everything. They would prefer to live under totalitarian martial law and be tortured to death. Because you know how them damn Arabs are. You know how them Muslims are. They'd rather be tortured to death than be free. Like, how stupid do they think we are? In fact, what happened at Camp David was they offered Arafat a pile of crap that he obviously had no choice but to reject. And then they went, oh, well, see how they are? We offered to give them everything, and they said no. And you idiots are stupid enough to believe that. And why in the world would he do that? And of course, we know from Clayton Swisher's book that he wrote all about this. He was an eyewitness to the whole thing. And we know that Clinton told Arafat, listen, I know that the Israelis are changing the deal. I know they're being intransigent. I know, Yasser Arafat, that it's not all your fault. And I promise you that I won't blame it, the failure of the thing, on you. It's the Israelis who are the intransigent ones here today. They refuse to even put out a map. Somebody brought out a map and they threw a fit and said, no, we're not doing maps yet. But guys, we've only got half a day left. How are we going to negotiate if we're not allowed to bring out a map? Like, the whole thing was a joke, dude. And then what did Bill Clinton do? He came out and said it was all Yasser Arafat's fault. The Israelis are telling the truth. I said, we know the Israelis were blackmailing Bill Clinton. They had secret recordings of him cheating on his wife. He was their slave. And we also know that he continued to rape children provided to him, or at least young women provided to him by the Israeli Mossad. Hey, I know you got me good and blackmail. Just keep them coming, all right? Says Bill Clinton, the face-biting rapist, degenerate scum. And then people go, hey, even Bill Clinton said it was Arafat's fault. How do you like that? Even Bill Clinton, the face-biting rapist, the guy who burned all the Branch Davidians' little babies to death. Even he says it's true. That's how you know it's true. The guy who is known as the worst liar of the 20th century. Even he says it. You see how confirmed my bias is? Yeah. And what does he say? He says that the Israelis were willing to give up all this land that they have literally military conquered, that they swear is part of their religion, that they have the right to steal from people. And yet their victims refuse to accept total surrender to them. Yeah, anyway. I think anyone who ever believed that, you have to really look yourself in the mirror and ask, and I don't mean you, but I just mean anyone listening to this. What's really defective about me that I would let such thin gruel propaganda work? How could anyone in the world who listens to these absolute idiot Hasbara talking points on the various podcasts think that oh yeah, that makes perfect sense? That Yasser Arafat could have been the president of a nation state. And instead he decided to just die of polonium poisoning in a refugee camp. Like a good little Muslim would, right? Like a Muslim terrorist would. You know, like a Muslim character in a Hollywood movie would, right? But not like anything that corresponds in reality. And if you want to read all about it, just look up Clayton Swisher on Amazon.com, The Secret History of Camp David. I always get the title wrong. It's very close to that. And Clayton Swisher was there, you know, the whole time. He was a security guard, I think, at the time, but was watching the whole thing unfold in front of him. And by the way, there's another great source for this, which is Robert Malley, who was later accused of being in bed with Iran or something. I don't know the truth of that, but that was 25 years later. Back then, Malley worked for Bill Clinton, and he wrote a thing for the New York Review of Books about how, man, it's such a lie that this was all Arafat's fault. He was given an offer he couldn't possibly accept. Now let's fast forward to another pile of lies, which is that in 2005, Ariel Sharon withdrew from the Gaza Strip, thus creating a Palestinian state. And you'll hear that scumbag liar Sayanim Ben Shapiro say, oh yeah, they disengaged from Gaza. They gave the Palestinians their own state, and then all they got was rockets in return. Again. I mean, do you remember 2005? Was there some giant ceremony where they created a Palestinian state and I slept through it or something? Because in fact, that's not what happened in 2005. What happened in 2005 was Ariel Sharon forced the Jewish settlers who were squatting in Gaza out of there and put the place under a total siege. And then worked as they had been working since the late 1980s. So by then, more than 15 years, to prop up Hamas as a right-wing religious alternative to the PLO. And they would prop up Hamas to rule over the Gaza Strip so that they would have an excuse to bomb it. And all you have to do is type in this, Arnon Soffer, S-O-F-F-E-R, and then kill and kill and kill. That's the quote. And you'll probably find it on my website. It's reprinted at my website, scotthorton.org/fair use. Arnon Soffer, kill and kill and kill. And this is a guy, get this, he was a demographer at Tel Aviv University. And he started crunching some numbers, and he went and he panicked, and he went and he had a meeting with the Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon. And he said, Ariel Sharon, there's too many Palestinians, and they're having too many babies. And there are right now almost as many Palestinians living under our captivity as there are Israeli Jews. And especially if you count the sort of third-class citizens of the Palestinian citizens of Israel, again, 1/5 of the population. If you count the occupied subjects in the territories, as well as the Israeli Palestinian citizens, then you have almost a 50-50 split. And if this goes on like this, then you see what we have, a dictionary definition, apartheid state, a rule of the minority over the majority. And that cannot stand. That is untenable in terms of our relations with the rest of the West. And so what was his advice to Ariel Sharon? He said, again, the Bible says they get to murder everybody and steal the West Bank, but they don't have as much of a religious mandate for the Gaza Strip. They just like beachfront property, if you quote Jared Kushner, you know. But the whole thing about the West Bank is that's Judea and Samaria, and they have to take that back according to some extremist religious types. That's their religious mandate to do. But the Gaza Strip, not as much. So Soffer's advice to Sharon was, here's what we should do. We should, quote unquote, withdraw from the Gaza Strip, holding it under siege from the outside. But essentially just figuratively kicking them out of Israeli control. So that, like, as a bookkeeping trick, do you dig me? We can subtract the Palestinian population of the Gaza Strip from the overall number of Palestinians that we ruthlessly rule over as rightsless pellets in our totalitarian occupation, right? So there's, you understand what I'm saying? There's 6 million Israeli Jews. There's 6 million Palestinian Arabs. There's about 5 million of them are under total occupation, right? So now we're at an apartheid situation. So what we're going to do is we're going to, quote unquote, kick 2 million of them out of our jurisdiction, even though, of course, they'll still be right there, totally in our captivity. But we'll just claim that somehow they don't count toward the 6 anymore. Now it'll be back to 6 million versus 3 million on the West Bank, and that might be totalitarian, communist level oppression, but at least it's not minority rule over a majority. which looks bad for Hezbollah purposes. Now, I know this sounds completely stupid because the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza are still under their control. But it's just a figure of speech, man. That's all it is. And that's what they say. Oh, it's disengagement. We gave them their own independent state, which is totally preposterous. They have no seaport. They have no airport. They're not allowed to fish even 3 miles off their own coast. They'll get killed. Then they have no sovereignty, no independence, no rights whatsoever. They live essentially in a giant concentration camp under the control of the Israelis. And you can read it again. I know it's in front of you right there. Read Arnon Sofer. He says to the lady from the Jerusalem Post who's interviewing him, her name is Ruby something, I think. And she says, yeah, but I mean, what are we going to do with the people in the Gaza Strip? They're going to run riot. They're going to go crazy. We can't just hold them all like under this permanent siege because they're going to turn to violence. And then he says, we will just have to kill and kill and kill. In order, this is the policy of what they call, you've heard this before, mowing the lawn or mowing the grass. That means just killing enough of them to drive the temperature back down again until we come back in a few years and do it again. Kill and kill and kill. You hear me? As a bookkeeping trick. As a bookkeeping trick. So that they can pretend that these people are outside of their control so that they are not obligated to provide for their rights or to grant them independence so that they can provide for their own. Okay, further. Because you asked me like devil's advocate position. Okay, so like your Zionist auntie is listening to this. Google this one too. Dov Weissglass, D-O-V Weissglass, formaldehyde. Dov Weissglass, he was another advisor to Ariel Sharon. And Sharon was being criticized for the public relations. What do you mean you're giving up the Gaza Strip? So Dov Weissglass explains, no, see? What we're doing is we're sabotaging the peace process. We're putting the peace process in formaldehyde. As long as the West Bank and Gaza Strip are divided, and the Gaza Strip remains under the control of Hamas, then we don't have to negotiate toward a Palestinian state. And every liberal in America, and every liberal in Europe, and every liberal in Tel Aviv who says, why aren't we negotiating for a Palestinian state? We can now say to them, well, screw you. You don't really expect us to negotiate with these terrorists, do you? But they're the ones who put the terrorists there. You go back, read Richard Sale in UPI, S-A-L-E, Richard Sale in UPI, read Andrew Higgins in the Wall Street Journal, and you can see where Israel helped to spawn Hamas in the first place in the late 1980s. The Shin Bet, it was originally a breakoff of the Muslim Brotherhood, but it was a charity. And it was Shin Bet and Mossad who turned it into a right-wing religious terrorist group as an alternative to the PLO to divide and conquer the Palestinians. So here they are physically divided by the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Now they're divided by, you have Yasser Arafat's whole group, Fatah, rules the West Bank, and you have Hamas rules the Gaza Strip. Now they didn't totally rule it in 2005, but they were still the strongest faction there in 2005. And in that article, if you search Dov Weissglass formaldehyde, he says there, we have a no one to talk to certificate from the United States Congress. It says we have no one to talk to. And we won't have anyone to talk to until Gaza becomes Norway. See you then, and shalom. Right? So in other words, the peace process, the two-state solution that was always a ruse, is now officially canceled. And our excuse is that we put a bunch of terrorists in charge in Gaza just so that we can say, look, terrorists are in charge in Gaza. And this is the same thing that lasted all the way through Ehud Olmert and all the way through Benjamin Netanyahu again. And you can find the quotes over and over again where Netanyahu himself said, if you want to thwart the creation of a Palestinian state, you must support Hamas in Gaza. Oh, I skipped one. Let me go back. In 06, in 05, W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice forced the Palestinians to hold elections. And Hamas won, but they only won a plurality. They did not win a majority in any single district anywhere in Palestine. They were forced to make a coalition government with Fatah. And then what happened? The Americans tried to do a coup d'etat and overthrow Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but it backfired. And they ended up taking all the guns and running Fatah out of the place. So it was the Americans' fault that Hamas ended up taking control. Now, when I say control, I don't mean they became the government of the Gaza Strip, because they did not. They're nothing but the strongest gang in an Israeli prison, right? They're not even trustees, right? Like if the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank are trustees in an Israeli prison, Hamas is just the strongest gang. They're just the Aryan nations or the Crips or the Bloods that took over the place when the guards withdrew to the perimeter. They're still just the strongest gang in a prison. They are nothing like a popularly elected government. The people of Gaza did not choose them. The Likud bears far more responsibility for Hamas's control of the people of the Gaza Strip than the people of the Gaza Strip are. And people can read my article, and I hope you doubt me. And I had people challenge me on this, and then they came back to me with their tail between their legs, and they said, boy, I didn't know that. And just Google my name, Scott Horton, and Netanyahu's support for Hamas backfired. And I wrote that article in 2023, right after October the 7th, with my co-author, Connor Friedman. Again, Netanyahu's support for Hamas backfired. And not only do I quote Netanyahu in there, but I quote a bunch of his guys spinning for him too, and saying, you just don't understand. You're too naive to understand the brilliant Machiavellian politics of our dear leader, Netanyahu, who was so smart and wise and sophisticated that he knows you have to foist this terrorist group Hamas on the people of Palestine so that we can point at them and claim scapegoat and claim that no Palestinian deserves rights because Hamas is there. That's our scam. We are evil, lying, terrorist supporting, murderer, double dealing scum, and this is our policy. Rejoice. Aren't we great? Wouldn't Machiavelli be jealous of our brilliance in the way that we implement this brilliant policy? That's what they said. That's what they said. That's what the Likud said over and over. They support Hamas just so they can scapegoat the Palestinians. Again, people, ask yourself, how could you ever let these scum lie to you and manipulate you and make you think that the bullies are the victims and they're absolute helpless, tortured to death children victims are the terrorist perpetrators? And I mean the Palestinian people, not Hamas. Hamas are terrorists. They do target civilians. They have in the past, and they have, as of 2 years ago. But the Palestinian people are not terrorists. Terrorism is a tactic used by the desperate and by the stupid when they attack innocent civilians and obviously undermine support for their own, goals to a great degree. Often is not just criminal and immoral, but also stupid and backfires in many ways. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the overall narrative that the Palestinian people are bums. The Palestinian people, their religion makes them evil. Their religion makes them hate goodness, like our innocent, wonderful Israeli Jewish friends who never did anything except try to get along and be safe in the world. What a pile of crap. They might as well be spinning for Hitler. They might as well be spinning for Osama bin Laden. They are on the side of the aggressor. They are on the side of evil. And there is no more criminal and ruthless and murderous regime on the face of the earth right now than the Israeli regime. Not the Chi-Coms. And think about all the propaganda. Think about the absolute, speaking of like Austin, the Austin-sized shovel of shit that they have shoveled you about the genocide of the Uyghurs in Western China over the last 20 years. Yeah. Oh, you really think the Chinese have murdered 300,000 or even I've heard 3 million Uyghurs, huh? And yet we just see no evidence of that, do we? We don't see anything like the Gaza Strip in Western China, do we? We don't see anything like what W. Bush and Barack Obama did to Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and Syria in China at all. Those are just lies. You get American right wingers all upset over some make believe shit that never even happened to a bunch of Muslims in Western China who they hate and would join up with the communists in crushing anyway. They'll cry crocodile tears all day for Uyghur bin Ladenites in the name of humanitarianism, just because the CCP with the red flag are falsely accused of perpetrating these crimes that don't even exist. And then look at the Gaza Strip, as Jared Kushner himself said. This is a guy who, when Netanyahu came to town, he was sleeping in Jared Kushner's bed in New York City. Read it in the New York Times.
Netanyahu is sleeping in Kushner's bed?
In Kushner's bed. And Kushner said Gaza looks like somebody dropped an atom bomb on it. Kushner said that. Get it? Like even Jared Kushner, right? Not like in the even Bill Clinton lies sense, but in even Jared Kushner admits this truth.
Wow. All wrapped up in all their fucking nonsense and dirty deeds, eh?
Yeah. You know what? It's also wrapped up in idiotic American social psychology, where if you're a right winger, you just don't want to hear this, because if you agree with this, then that means you're some kind of commie. Because don't you know, like, this is what the commie college kids think. And you don't want to get commie college kid cooties all over you. Well, you know what? There are plenty of right wingers who think this too. Don't you read the American Conservative Magazine? Don't you watch the Tucker Carlson show? Don't you listen to John J. Mearsheimer, the dean of the Realist School of Foreign Policy in the United States of America? There are a lot of people. Hell, look at Dave Smith. Look at Ron Paul, the greatest living American, probably the greatest American hero ever. He won't put up with this for a day. You don't have to be like some commie college kid to get good on Palestine. And you don't have to identify with a bunch of National Socialist anti-Semites either. This just has nothing to do with this stuff. And as Ron Paul said a million times over implicitly, if you like your identity, you can keep it. You don't have to move left to have humanity for the Palestinians. They didn't do anything to you. They're the innocent victims in this. Our society is guilty of allowing our government to help the Israeli regime perpetrate this evil. It's our responsibility to stop it. And that's not negotiating with terrorism. It's the right thing to stop doing the wrong thing. And if we had followed Ron Paul's policy this whole time, September 11th would have never happened. The terror wars would have never happened. America would be at peace. The third millennium would be kick ass as far as anyone could tell. And it was essentially following Zionism is what led America down this path to destruction in the post-Cold War era. And we never had to do it. We never had to do it. And look, not our entire Eastern Europe policy or our China policy is all about Israel, but kinda, because the neoconservatives are at the heart of it all. And what's their interest? Preserving the American empire so that, in the words of Norman Podhoretz himself, it's available to defend Israel. So if they have to keep us interested in Eastern Europe or in China or North Korea or anywhere else, as long as the American people don't have their way and bring their forces home and have a limited constitutional republic to protect their own freedom, that must be prevented at all costs. Those people have to be smeared as isolationists and Nazis, because the American people, the 350 million of us, we exist to serve Israel, this tiny little country the size of New Jersey with a population of a few million people, when only 2% of Americans are Jews, and probably like a third of them are even Zionists, right? Maybe 2/3, but like there are millions of American Jews don't even give a damn about Israel at all. And certainly hundreds of millions of Americans who don't give a damn about Israel at all. And yet somehow we exist to serve them. The empire exists to serve the interests of the client state. Pardon me, but I have an objection and a better idea.
Well, Scott, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your words. I appreciate your insight. Can you let everyone know where to find you? What would you like people to check out right now for yourself?
Yeah, well, look, the big deal is next week we're launching the Academy. As I say, it's me and Bovard and Barud and Bupert, and it's going to be killer, man. And it's scotthortonacademy.com. Sign up there. Of course, my show is the Scott Horton Show. I've got almost 6,200 interviews going back to 2003 for you there at scotthorton.org. What the hell? I got too many things. ScottHortonShow.com is my Substack, and I'm publishing the audiobook in chapters. The audiobook of Provoked. I have the first 3 sections for you there. ScottHortonShow.com. And of course, I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, which is, I think, the most important, right there with Mises, right close to and right around one of the most important libertarian institutions in America right now. A really great team of writers and authors and podcasters. We've published 17 books, going on 18, 19, and 20 coming up very soon here. And that's, 4 of my own and many more. Really great books there. And just a great team of guys, man. So just get yourself inundated up to your eyeballs at libertarianinstitute.org. And then to wrap, I guess, it is the most important project on the internet, antiwar.com. And that's Dave DeCamp, Eric Garris, Kyle Anzalone, Jason Ditz, Margaret Griffiths, and the rest of the crew making everything happen there at antiwar.com every day. And then, of course, catch up, read my books. They're all available on amazon.com. Fool's Errand, Enough Already, The Great Ron Paul, Hotter Than the Sun, and Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine.
Awesome, Scott. Well, thank you again. Just, if you don't mind, just hang on for a quick minute. Thanks to everyone listening and watching. Thanks to everyone in the chat. Please make sure to subscribe to the Divulgence podcast on YouTube. You can check us out on Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also check me out on Twitter at Divulgence Pod. So thanks, everyone. And